There was a time, believe it or not, when France was the undisputed center of the world. A time when the French weren't just the butt of lazy surrender jokes, but the force everyone either feared, admired, or desperately tried to stop. A time when one man, barely over 5 feet tall, average height for the time by the way, took a post-revolutionary mess and forged it into an empire that shook the world. That time? Well, that was when France was cool, and the man behind it all didn't even speak French until he was 9. You already know his name. Napoleon Bonaparte. The man, the myth, the reason why Europe needed a decade-long group therapy session. When you think of France today, you might picture wine, baguettes, and enthusiastic strikes. But there was a brief, however glorious moment in history when France was undeniably cool. And that moment had everything to do with a short Corsican who refused to stay in exile. Born in 1769, Napoleon was a Corsican. France had only recently annexed Corsica, and young Napoleon grew up despising the French aristocracy, while actually benefiting from it. He attended a military school in France at the age of 9. After his father did some befriending with the French governor of Corsica, Napoleon buried himself in books, especially on history and military strategy. He idolized figures like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, and finally graduated at the age of 16, just before the French Revolution. A delightful period of beheadings and chaos that left France in desperate need of someone competent. Napoleon's first posting was a low-ranking artillery officer, which wasn't the most glamorous branch of the army at the time. Infantry and cavalry got all the glory, while artillery officers were essentially math nerds calculating trajectories. But Napoleon saw something others didn't. Artillery, when used right, could change the battlefield. Napoleon's chance to prove himself came in 1793 at the Siege of Toulon. France was in the middle of the revolution, and the port city had fallen into the hands of royalist rebels, backed by the British of course. The French desperately needed a way to retake the city, and young Captain Bonaparte was put in charge of the artillery. He focused fire on key enemy positions and launched a daring assault that forced the British fleet to abandon the city. The victory was a turning point not just for the revolution, but for Napoleon himself. His bold tactics earned him a promotion to a brigadier general at just 24 years old. And from that moment on, he never looked back. After Toulon, Napoleon's rise was a masterclass in turning every situation, good or bad, into a career boost. He crushed the Austrians in Italy, turned the failed Egyptian adventure into a personal win, and when he saw France's government falling apart, he walked in and took charge like he was meant to be there all along. And, as if casually ruling the country wasn't sufficient enough, Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804. And oh boy, it was time for France to have a massive glow-up. Suddenly, French uniforms were the sharpest in Europe. French officers rushed into battle wearing elaborate epaulets and bicorn hats. Napoleon himself pioneered a distinctive, almost cinematic aesthetic. The hand-in-coat pose, the grand coronation, and the dramatic speeches. He truly understood the power of image. Now, I'm sure you all are familiar with Napoleon's legendary battles across Europe, so instead we'll focus more on other aspects of his reign that made France great. Let us start off by his laws. Napoleon's greatest triumph wasn't just on the battlefield, but in the courtroom. Before his reforms, France's legal system was a tangled web of feudal traditions, regional laws, and revolutionary decrees. Napoleon swept all that away, replacing it with a unified, rational legal code that prioritized equality before the law, property rights, and secular authority over outdated privileges. But of course, running an empire isn't just about conquering or reforming laws. It's also about making sure your people don't riot because bread costs more than their rent. And Napoleon, for all his battlefield genius, wasn't about to let his empire collapse over something as trivial as basic economic stability. First, he created the Bank of France. This wasn't just some fancy piggy bank. It stabilized the currency, controlled inflation, and made sure France's economy didn't completely implode every time the government changed hands. Unlike the financial disaster that was revolutionary France, Napoleon's system actually worked. Then he reformed taxation, which surprisingly meant making sure people actually paid their taxes. Under the old system, the nobility and clergy basically got a free pass, while the common folk carried the burden. He created an efficient, centralized tax collection system. And because he wasn't about to rely solely on taxing his own people, he also ruthlessly plundered every country he conquered. Arts, gold, entire city treasures. If it wasn't nailed down, it was going to Paris. The Louvre? Yeah, let's just say a lot of its collection arrived via a special delivery from Napoleon's campaigns. All of this meant that under Napoleon, France wasn't just a military powerhouse, it was a financial one. The country had a stable economy, a functioning banking system, and a tax structure that didn't rely entirely on squeezing the poor. Napoleon also knew the importance of an education system. Well, more like an indoctrination system, but hey, can you really blame Napoleon for using the education system as a propaganda machine? I mean, using schools to shape young minds isn't an outdated concept, am I right? Napoleon overhauled France's education system, creating a structured, state-controlled curriculum that emphasized science, mathematics, and as mentioned, a healthy dose of nationalist propaganda. He founded the Lycée, elite high schools designed to pump out a new generation of bureaucrats, engineers, and officers who were loyal to the regime. Basically, if you were smart and ambitious, Napoleon had a spot for you. Universities also reformed. Primary schools standardized. Women's education? Well, let's just say Napoleon wasn't exactly progressive on that front, but for young men looking to climb the ranks, Napoleon's education system was a golden ticket. It churned out the administrators and officers he needed to run his ever-expanding empire. Speaking of this audacious empire, we could say Napoleon didn't just rule France, he marketed France. This man understood branding before it was even a thing. He flooded France with paintings, coins, and statues depicting himself as a glorious leader, equal parts warrior, lawgiver, and benevolent ruler. Napoleon even picked his own imperial emblems, the bee. At first glance, it might seem like a strange choice, but there was a method to the madness. The bee had been a symbol of the Merovingians, France's earliest dynasty, and Napoleon, always looking for ways to link himself to France's grand past, revived it. And when it came to controlling the narrative, he was ruthless. He censored newspapers, ensuring that only the most flattering reports made it to the public. For instance, let's look at one of his greatest hits from earlier, the Egyptian campaign. Sure, it was a military disaster, but Napoleon returned to France before the news of his failure spread, bringing along scholars and artists who had documented the wonders of Egypt. Suddenly, instead of people talking about how the mission was a failure, they were mesmerized by the Rosetta Stone and tales of ancient civilizations. That, my friends, is how you lose a war but win the headlines. So perhaps we can all now agree that Napoleon wasn't just a conqueror. He was a state builder, a reformer, and one of history's greatest self-promoters. His legal code still forms the backbone of modern law. His economic policies kept France from financial collapse, and his military tactics are studied to this day. Sure, he got a little too ambitious, like Russia in winter, really? But for a brief moment in history, France was undeniably cool. And even when Napoleon was finally defeated and was involuntarily booked a trip to a remote island, twice by the way, his legend only grew. He became the template for every ambitious, charismatic leader who followed, some for better, some for much worse. So the next time someone asks when France was cool, you'll have an answer. It was when a small Corsican with big ambitions decided that France wasn't just going to be another country, it was going to be the country. And for a while, it really was. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you'll definitely want to check out this one. Until the next time.